In this video, I'm going to teach you the system I've used for decades to learn over a dozen languages, from French and Japanese to Sanskrit and Arabic. It's a system that explains the central paradox of language learning, why learning your fifth language can actually be easier and faster than learning your second. It's a concept that goes against everything we're usually told. I'm a firm believer that not only can you study multiple languages at the same time, but if your goal is to become a true polyglot, a practitioner of polyliteracy, you should study multiple languages at the same time. I've spent most of my life on what Professor Arguez calls the path of the polyglot. From my very first Spanish class in high school, to studying and spending a few years living in Japan, and eventually to studying 8 languages each and every day. And what I discovered over all those years of trial and error, and believe me, there's a lot of error, is that most people fail at language learning, not because they lack talent or intelligence or time. They fail because they are focused on completely the wrong things. They're trying to sprint a marathon and they burn out before the first mile marker. They treat language learning like a task to be completed, a box to be checked, instead of what it truly is, a lifestyle to be lived. The reason the system I'm about to show you works so well, so consistently, is because it breaks down the entire process of language mastery into 2 distinct crucial stages. Most learners, probably you included, only ever see the first stage. The first stage is acquisition. This is the part everyone knows and obsesses over. It's the act of consuming new material, going through your textbook, doing your flashcards, memorizing new vocabulary, watching videos. It's the input phase. It's the part that feels like work. The second and far more important stage is integration. This is the invisible work. It's the process of making that language a permanent part of who you are. It's not just about memorizing facts. It's about building new neural pathways, creating another fully functional operating system for your mind. It's peeling the onion, going deeper and deeper until the language is a part of your very thought process. It's the difference between knowing about Italian and being able to feel in Italian. Most people think that by relentlessly focusing on the first stage, on acquiring more grammar rules, more vocabulary, more stuff, they'll eventually become fluent. So they try to speed read grammar books, they binge listen to language podcasts at triple speed, they cram hundreds of flashcards a day, desperately trying to force the information into their heads through brute force. But you know what? That is not how it works. That is not how you build something that lasts. You're just overstuffing a mental suitcase that has a hole in the bottom. The information pours out as fast as it comes in. Once we understand how true deep language learning does work, you'll see why my system is so effective. You see, when it comes to living and breathing a new language, it's much less about how much information comes into your brain, and it's much more about how much stays in your brain and becomes a part of you. And that is what the second stage, the integration period, is all about. It's the part that is almost always neglected because it requires patience and a different kind of effort. So in this video, I'm going to teach you a system for mastering both of these stages, which in turn increases your attention, your understanding, and your ability to actually use the languages for love in the way you've always dreamed of. But first, we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. What does it even mean to know a language? Most people think it means achieving fluency, this vague, intimidating idea of being a perfect, flawless speaker. But I'm here to tell you that's a trap. It's a goal that causes more anxiety than progress. So should that even be the goal? And the short answer is an emphatic no. But here's the secret. Trying to become a perfect speaker shouldn't be our goal in the first place. And we know this because of a man who could actually do this, perhaps better than anyone else in modern history. This man's name was Cardinal Giuseppe Mezzofanti. His story is so wild it almost sounds like a myth. An Italian cardinal from the 19th century, he was a living legend. His memory and linguistic ability were just ridiculous. The famous poet, Lord Byron, who is famously cynical and hard to impress, interviewed him and came away staggered, saying that Mezzofanti spoke English street slang perfectly, better than many Englishmen. He was documented to have studied upwards of 78 languages, and these weren't just languages he'd read in a book. He could use them. He served as a confessional father in Rome during the Napoleonic Wars, so when foreign soldiers from all over Europe were on their deathbeds, they could give their last confession to a priest who understood them in their own native tongue. Can you imagine the comfort that brought? He learned languages from dying soldiers, from visiting Jesuits, from hotel keepers, who he instructed to let him know whenever a foreigner came to town speaking a new language. He was a linguistic vacuum cleaner, absorbing everything around him. But here's the surprise. Here's the paradox that holds the key for us. Despite this superhuman ability, he never wrote anything. No books, no scholarly articles. In fact, some people at the time accused him of just parroting because his knowledge wasn't academic. He wasn't a philologist dissecting grammar. He wasn't a translator. So if the greatest polyglot in recent history wasn't a scholar, what was he? He was a practitioner. He was a man who had successfully turned his mind into a vessel for living, breathing languages. His brain had multiple operating systems and he could switch between them at will, just as I can switch between speaking English, Spanish, and Japanese. This story shows us that our goal shouldn't be some abstract academic fluency. That's a false summit. The true, attainable, and far more rewarding goal is to achieve what Professor Arguelles calls polyliteracy. Polyliteracy is the ability to think, feel, and exist within multiple linguistic operating systems. It's about being able to read and appreciate literature in another tongue. It's about understanding a culture from the inside out. It's not about being perfect. It's about integrating a language so deeply that it becomes a part of your identity. And that is what the system I'm about to teach you helps you to build. So to start using this system, you have to understand that success in language learning is not one-dimensional. Over decades of my own study and from learning with Professor Arguelles, I've identified what I call the 9 factors of polyliterate success. Think of this like building a house. You can't just have a foundation and walls. You also need a roof, plumbing, and electricity. If any one of these is missing, the whole structure is compromised. Most learners fail because they might have 1 or 2 of these. Maybe they put in the time or they have some natural talents, but they don't cultivate a balance across all 9. Just like a balanced diet, you can't just eat protein and expect to be healthy. You need a holistic approach. So let's go through these 9 factors together. During the acquisition stage, you'll identify which factors are in play. Then during the integration stage, you'll apply the right process to cultivate that factor, which takes the knowledge and stores it in your long-term memory, making it a permanent part of you. Let's start with the foundation, your inner world. The first 2 factors are about your internal disposition. They're often overlooked because they feel intangible, but they are the soil in which your other efforts will grow. If this soil isn't fertile, no amount of hard work will bear fruit. The first factor is consciousness, or what I call language awareness. This is your fundamental receptivity to the very idea of other languages. When you hear a foreign language, does your brain just register it as meaningless noise, a chaotic jumble of sounds? Or does it light up with curiosity, thinking, that's interesting, I wonder what that means. I could speak that. I want to speak that. It's the difference between seeing a locked door and seeing a keyhole. Let me give you a concrete example. Professor Arguelles had a friend from Mexico who went to Spain years ago. He was a native Spanish speaker, totally fluent, and got lost in Barcelona. He was trying to ask for directions, but nobody was responding to him in a helpful way. He became visibly frustrated. Why? Because everyone was speaking Catalan. To his ears, it was just incomprehensible noise. He couldn't penetrate it. That's the feeling. It's like a wall of sound you can't get through. His language consciousness was so narrowly tuned to the frequency of Spanish that he couldn't even recognize a closely related Romance language. He had no hook in his mind to hang the new sounds on. To a polyliterate mind, Catalan would have sounded like a fascinating dialect of a familiar tune. To him, it was static. Developing this consciousness is the first step, and the process for it is what I call active exposure. You can't just passively listen to a language and hope it sinks in. Listening to a Spanish radio station in the background while you work isn't studying. That's just creating noise. You have to engage with it actively. A fantastic tool for this is the website bible.is. Now, you don't need to be religious to use this site, but this site has produced audio of the New Testament in thousands of languages and dialects. You can pick a language you've never even heard of, say Yoruba or Rapa Nui, and you can shadow the audio. Shadowing means you speak along with the recording at the same time. You won't understand a single word, of course, but that's not the point. The point is you are training your brain to recognize the music of the language, its rhythm, its intonation, its flow. You start to hear the patterns instead of just the noise. You are consciously building your language consciousness, one strange and beautiful sound at a time. It's like tuning a radio, searching for new frequencies. The second factor, closely related to the first, is affinity. If consciousness is your mind's openness, affinity is your heart's openness. This is the spirit of the language. Does it feel beautiful to you, or does it sound ugly? Does the script look like a work of art or just a confusing mess of squiggles? Learning a language is a lot like pursuing a lover. A language you have affinity for is one that feels like it's smiling at you, holding its arms out for you. The words just stick. You hear a word once or twice and you remember it because it feels right. It feels like it means what it sounds like. A language you have no affinity for is like a scorned lover. It scowls at you, rejects your advances. You look up the same word a dozen times and it just won't stay in your head. It feels alien. The wind is always in your face. For me, I find the Devanagari script used for Sanskrit and Hindi to be incredibly aesthetic. It's rounded and flowing and logical. It looks beautiful on the page, and that beauty pulls me in. It makes me want to learn it. It's an entirely personal, subjective feeling, but it's incredibly powerful. That's affinity. Or think of the sounds. For some, the guttural sounds of German or Dutch are harsh. For me, they feel powerful and resonant. For others, the melodic flow of Italian is music. So what's the process for developing this? You have to follow your curiosity. You simply cannot force yourself to learn a language you hate, or at least it will be a miserable, inefficient process. The driving force behind this whole journey is what Professor Arguez calls polyitis, that innate itch, that compulsive desire to learn languages. And polyitis thrives on affinity. It needs to be fed with things that you find genuinely fascinating. So explore the culture, listen to the music, watch the films, try the food, look at the arts. Find something about the culture that you genuinely love, and it will build a bridge of affinity to the language itself. Let languages choose you as much as you choose them. If you feel a pull towards Korean because of K-dramas, lean into that. That's your entry point. Don't fight it. Now, at this point, you might be looking at this system and thinking this sounds a little out of your control. I can't just change my affinity for a language, or I wasn't born with the talent for this. It can feel overwhelming, like you have to be born a certain way to succeed. And you know what? You're right, to a degree. In fact, it's crucial that you understand that these are not just innate fixed traits. They are skills that you can cultivate, but it's not natural. And that's precisely why it works. If you have no time pressure and it doesn't matter how well you learn something, then you can learn and read however you want. But what research and decades of my own experience have shown is that there are clear biological limitations to the human brain. To learn a lot to a high level in a short amount of time, a lot of processes need to go right. This is why most people plateau. They hit a wall with their language learning and never really improve for the rest of their lives. It's because learning is extremely complicated and they aren't aware of all the factors they need to manage. For me, figuring out what processes to even care about and then how to execute on them correctly took me the better part of 2 decades of almost constant experimentation, of reading dusty research papers, and of coaching people to see what works. And honestly, I got lucky because 20 years ago, a lot of the best resources and communities didn't even exist. Which is why, to make it easier for you, I've started putting all these deeper principles into a free newsletter. I take everything I've learned that helps you become a more efficient, fulfilled learner, the things that have the highest chance of giving you success, and I package them in a way that you can take and implement into your own learning. It's my way of consolidating those decades of experience into actionable advice for you. It's the antidote to the overwhelm. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, it's completely free. I'll leave a link in the description for you. And I often give away the books I write for free there too, so you definitely don't want to miss out. All right, getting back to the 9 factors. Now that we've covered the internal landscape, let's talk about the external tools you need to acquire. The 3rd factor is education. When I say education, I don't just mean school. In fact, for most people, their formal education in languages was a net negative experience. It was boring, it was forced, and it taught an outdated model of grammar translation that just doesn't work for building living languages in your mind. It treats language like a dead thing to be dissected, not a living thing to be inhabited. Let me give you an example of what I mean. A few years ago, a test resurfaced from 1911. It was an exam you needed to pass just to get into high school in the American Midwest. It had formal grammar questions about your own native language, English, as well as history questions and math problems. They gave this same test to students at Ivy League universities today, and most of them couldn't pass it. The standards for what counts as a basic education have been completely dumbed down. We're not being equipped with the foundational knowledge of our own language, let alone others. So the process here is not to rely on your past schooling. The process is to become an autodidact. You absolutely must learn how to teach yourself. This is the most crucial skill on the entire path. Why? Because the materials you teach yourself, the connections you make in your own mind, the aha moments you have alone at your desk, those will stick with you permanently in a way that no classroom lecture ever will. The autodidact's path is the path to permanence. It's the difference between being a passenger and being the driver of your own learning journey. This leads directly to the next factor, experience. There's a well-known phenomenon in warfare. Fighter pilots who successfully shoot down 5 enemy planes are called aces. And what they found is that once a pilot becomes an ace, their likelihood of surviving the rest of the war skyrockets. They've crossed a threshold. They know what they're doing. They've seen it all before. They can anticipate the enemy's moves. Language learning is exactly the same. The first language you teach yourself is the hardest. You're building the plane while flying it. The second is a little easier, but once you've learned 5 or 6 languages, your 7th, 8th, and 9th become incrementally easier. You've crossed the threshold. You've become a language ace. My own journey is a perfect example. Learning Spanish from the beginning was a monumental effort. Japanese was also a long slog, but then after studying Spanish and French when I went to study Italian, I found I could just understand Italian. It wasn't a struggle. It felt familiar. After that, I got Portuguese and Catalan practically in the bargain. They just came to me because I had the experience of learning their sister languages. My brain had already built the framework. So the process here is what I call branch learning. You could learn random languages, but learning a language family has its perks. The transfer of knowledge is immense. If you get a solid footing in one language like Latin and then get really good at 2 other languages from that family like French and Spanish, you'll discover that you can acquire the others, Italian, Portuguese, Catalan, at a massive discount. It feels like a cheat code for your brain. You know the system, so you just need to learn the variations. It's like buying one language and getting 2 or 3 others for free. I love this concept so much that I wrote comparative grammar books on language families, including the Romance, Germanic, Scandinavian, Indian, Dravidian, and Semitic language families, So you can learn these languages even faster by seeing their similarities and differences. Links in the description below if you want that. Okay, so you have the inner disposition and the acquired toolkit, but none of that matters if you can't execute. This final group of factors is about the engine that drives your daily practice. Factors 5, 6, and 7 are character, time, and receptivity. I group these together because they all work in concert. A three-legged stool, if one is missing, the whole thing topples over. First, character. What I mean by this is a combination of studiousness and self-discipline. Now, a lot of people value studying, but they don't actually relish it. They see it as a chore, like doing the dishes. The secret to my success, if there is one, is that I am completely systematically regular because I've learned to find it fun. It's not a burden. It's a form of play. I'm a little kid with a new puzzle every day when I get to study languages. You have to cultivate that sense of joyful discipline, that polyitis or collector's instinct that makes you want to add just one more piece to your collection. Second, time. This is about time management, but not in the way you might think. The most effective way to study is not in long, exhausting marathon sessions. It's in short, frequent, focused bursts. My core method is using 15-minute time chunks. If I study for an hour, I do 4 15-minute chunks spread throughout the day. This keeps the material fresh in your mind and makes the habit easier to stick to because anyone can find 15 minutes. It prevents cognitive fatigue and gives you multiple small wins throughout the day, which keeps your motivation high. Third, receptivity. This has two sides. First, it's the receptivity of the native speakers to you, the learner. Are they open and encouraging or are they dismissive? But it's also about your receptivity to making mistakes. You have to be willing to plunge in and sound foolish. You have to be able to laugh at yourself. If you're terrified of making a mistake, you'll never open your mouth. Let me give you a story that combines all three of these. Years ago, Professor Arguelles was in Peru backpacking. He had a deep desire to learn Quechua, the language of the Inca Empire. He had the character, the discipline to try. He managed his time, but the receptivity just wasn't there. He hiked the Inca Trail and the local porters who spoke Quechua amongst themselves would immediately switch to Spanish whenever he got close. It was like a wall went up. He stayed with a homestay mother who was a native speaker, but she was too embarrassed to let him record her. The door was closed. But his character and time management were there. He had the discipline to try every day. He had the courage to approach people. And even though he failed with Quechua, that same combination of systematic regularity and the willingness to look foolish is what allowed him to succeed with so many other languages where the doors were open, like in Sweden or Holland, where people were delighted to help. So what's the process for this group? It's systematic regularity and courage. You combine the discipline of a monk, showing up at the same time every day no matter what, with the courage of an explorer, plunging into the unknown and being able to laugh at yourself when you make mistakes. Finally, let's talk about the two factors that everyone worries about the most. The ones that become excuses for even starting. Factors 8 and 9 are talent and intelligence. Okay, so these are the two that stop most people before they even start. I'm not talented at languages, or I'm not smart enough. Let's debunk this right now. First, let's reframe them. Talent isn't about being a genius. For our purposes, talent is simply the ability to find the play in the work. People with language talents are the ones who experience it as a fun game rather than an arduous task. It's a knack for finding patterns, for enjoying the puzzle of it all. It's a skill that can be polished with practice. Professor Arguelles' father's identical twin brother had the same exact genes, but his father pursued poetry and languages while his brother pursued music and arts. Talents are potentials that are activated by dedicated practice. And intelligence isn't about having a high IQ. Barring a serious disability, anyone can learn their native language fluently, no matter how dumb they are. For polyliteracy, intelligence is about keeping your mind sharp and preventing cognitive decline. It's about being mentally agile, and there's no better mental exercise for that than learning a foreign language. The research is clear. It builds cognitive reserve and can even delay the onset of diseases like Alzheimer's. So what's the process? It's to treat yourself as a mental athlete. You foster your talent by consciously making the process a game. You gamify it. You find the fun. You don't see your study time as work. You see it as playtime. And you keep your mind sharp with novelty, with challenges, with physical exercise, with a good diet, with enough sleep. An athlete wouldn't expect their body to perform without training, diets, and rest. Why would you expect your mind to be any different? Running isn't separate from my language study. It's part of the same holistic system that keeps my mind ready to learn. So there you have it, the 9 factors of polyliterate success. From your inner world of consciousness and affinity, to your acquired toolkits of education and experience, to the engine that drives it all, character, time, courage, talent, and intelligence. The key to unlocking your potential isn't to be a master of any one of these. It's to keep all of them in balance. It is a holistic approach. It's a lifestyle you build piece by piece, day by day. But as I said at the beginning, knowing the factors is one thing. Actually juggling them is another. How do you balance learning new languages while maintaining your old ones? How do you create a system of cycles and epicycles that prevent any language from getting rusty without burning you out? How do you manage a dozen books in a dozen languages without losing your mind? That is what I call the art of equilibrium, and it's really the next level of this journey. It's the art of balancing your time so that you're always making progress without feeling overwhelmed. And it's a topic that requires its own deep dive. If you're ready to start building that system for yourself, the best place to begin is by signing up for the newsletter in the link below and subscribe to this channel. Also, I will be releasing my new app that uses mnemonics, which are clever hooks to help you remember vocabulary faster. The first language will be Spanish, so enter your email address in the link below to get access to that. I will be releasing the app in other languages too, so if you're interested, put your email address in the same place and I will notify you when it's ready. Also, subscribe to the channel. Okay, thank you so much for joining me on this path today. Keep it fun, keep it engaging, and good luck studying.